Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's edition of NRL Nostradamus. Joined once again by co-host Dicko Dixon. How are you, buddy?
Dizz, how are you, mate? I'm good.
That's it. Footy's finished now for the NRL anyway. But we go into the Pacific tests, which we'll do a brief preview at the end of this episode on to give everyone a bit of a rundown on what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk a little bit of Rumour Mill, and we are starting our review on the season that was, and we'll be going from wooden spooners all the way up to grand final winners. So this week's episode features the Tigers, the Rabbitohs, and the Parramatta Eels. Now, before we get into it, Dicko, just want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, CR8. They provide a tailored end-to-end service branding solution for promotional product and apparel. Visit their website, www.cr8.sydney. Jump online, give them a call, mention us for a discount, and check out what they have to offer. As you can see, we're sporting a bit of merch at the moment through Create. They do a great job and only provide the best quality out there.
Yeah, who is
Now,
it?
Dicko, before we get into the rumour mill, we've got a bit of a viewer's question on here, and it's around Mitchell Moses. Would you give him? I know we're going to talk about it maybe in the Parramatta Eels segment, but when it comes to Origin, a lot of the Parramatta fans think that their highlight of the year was Mitchell Moses and his standout performances in Origin. Would you give him a pass mark, or would you give him a overachieve mark, or did he sort of not make the grade?
Geez, you put me on the spot there, haven't you? Considering he didn't play the basically half a season after he didn't play a game after State of Origin 3, so I'm going to say if I'm just judging him on what he played, I'm going to give him a borderline 49%, I reckon, because if
49%. So just
well,
below.
Parramatta weren't going well before
Yep.
Origin.
Yep.
And with their squad, they should have been going better than what they were going.
Yeah.
So, which again we'll touch when we talk about them shortly.
Yeah.
He was excellent in State of Origin. So yeah, I'd probably give him. I'd probably give him I'd probably give him 50%.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Fair enough. Look, we'll jump into a few more questions there. Look, in my opinion, I kind of agree with you. I'll probably go like to the other end, like 51% only because they won Origin. To be honest, if they didn't win Origin, mate, he'd be almost at a D.
He'd be a D plus, mate. He'd be
Yeah,
a D plus.
he wouldn't be featuring in the pass mark section, that's for sure. But look, let's get to the rumour mill. Kobe Hetherington, you got a bit of news there for us.
Yeah. So basically, whilst Kevin Walters was the coach, he was told that he could pursue other opportunities because he wants to be a starting player. But since Michael Maguire has come into the role, Kobe Hetherington has been told by Michael Maguire that he is a required player. So I would expect to see him at least fulfill the last year of his contract. So at this stage, I believe the permission to talk to other clubs has been removed, and he will at least see out the remaining year, or I think it's 1 year left on his contract.
Yep. Okay, well, there you go. So it looks like Kobe Hetherington is going to bite down on the mouth guard and give it his best crack and hopefully get into that starting 17 week in, week out for next
And
season.
he was pretty good on the weekend actually for the PM's 13. So that will give him a lot of confidence going into next season for sure.
Absolutely. Now, Ben Hunt, there is a contract for him for next season. He clearly didn't perform towards the back end of the year, even though he was the leading try assist person in the competition. Um, he look, it's a bit of a tricky situation because I believe it was at the start of this year he was sort of wanting out anyway, and sort of turned the form around. Dragons seemed to be pretty happy. Dragons were going well. All of a sudden, they're pushing for the top 8 and shit the bed.
Mm.
And Ben Hunt obviously being at the forefront of that. We saw a pretty heated conversation between Ben Hunt and Shane Flanagan exchanged, on TV behind the scenes, where essentially I think he's been, obviously called out for underperforming in those key moments. And when you're getting paid the big bucks and you're the marquee player at the club and the halfback, you need to be stepping up in those moments, and it just didn't happen. He's pretty mediocre in terms of origin as well. So look, you've got to remember he's sort of 30, 34, 35 now, so he's on the decline. He's definitely not at his peak. Is the Dragons need to make a call whether they're going to hang on to Ben Hunt or offload him to another club. Now, he's been pretty open about wanting to move back to Queensland, and it looks like he may end up more than likely at the Titans.
So I feel like if he gets a contract longer than 1 year, so I know he's after a 2-year extension, and I feel like if some team was to offer him, I'm actually not limiting it to Queensland, because I feel like it'll be whatever team comes in with a multi-year offer, he'll take.
He'll take it. Yeah. Look, I tend to agree with you. I mean, just going off what he's sort of openly said to the media around wanting to come back to Queensland, but if no Queensland teams offer that 2-3 year deal and a Sydney team does, I'd say would take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, King Gutho, which we are going to touch on a little bit when we do the review of the Parramatta Eels season. Mate, he has been rumoured to go to 6 clubs. Now, we don't know how it's got to this point, and quite frankly, I think you can probably rule out, the Roosters, rule out probably the Bulldogs, rule out Seagulls, and rule out Titans. The only 2 contenders, I think, in my opinion, is the Dragons and the Tigers. And I can only really see it going one way, mate. I think he's going to end up at the Dragons. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't see him going anywhere else. I definitely don't see him going to the Tigers, because if he wants to play fullback, they've got a young kid in Jerome Buller, so I can't see them sort of putting their eggs in the basket with the Clint Gutherson. But you know what? It actually wouldn't surprise me. This is generally what happens. Wouldn't surprise me at the last minute if the Roosters swoop in and he ends up going there for some small amount of money. It's happened before with players. But yeah, I can't see him going anywhere other than the Dragons. I think I don't know. In our preview, which will be before next season, we'll talk about the Parramatta moving forward. But I don't know what their thoughts are around telling him he's no longer needed. I think, as you'll see by my review of their season, without him, they're a basket case. So.
Look, I think Parramatta have been horrendous in handling the whole situation around him, to be honest. Like, he's put his heart and soul into the club and undoubtedly probably been the best player, for a number of seasons, outside Moses and Brown. And just a key, I know they've gone out and bought Iongi and, essentially, they're looking to the future there. And half of me wants to applaud them. I think it's just the way that they've handled it. Like, if it was handled professionally, and he may not get a swan song. He may not get the send-off he deserves from Parramatta. And rather than getting, a round of applause and carried off the field at the end of last season, he's probably going to get another club.
Yeah, exactly. I'd expect him to be in another colour for sure. He definitely won't be playing for the Eels next season.
Well, watch this space. Now, the big one, Selwyn Cobbo. He is rumoured to be out of, not necessarily out of favour at Red Hill, I'd say, but definitely a few things going on behind the scenes there with Selwyn. He's got his family in Cherbourg. He hasn't, 100% sort of come out publicly. Clubs aren't officially allowed to negotiate until November 1, but we know conversations go on behind the scenes. No one's too silly to work that out. You don't get rumours plucked out of thin air. Look, the only 2 suitors really are the Roosters and the Cowboys, but talks are leading towards the Cowboys.
Yeah, so in terms of the Brisbane situation, I think the way their salary cap is, they're going to have to make a decision between one of their star centres in Selwyn and Katoni Staggs. And as a supporter, I know who I would be choosing myself, because I don't think Selwyn had a great season last year. I think he's got plenty of talent, and he could be an absolute world beater, no doubt about it. But his output last season was ordinary. He's openly stated he wants to play fullback. Neither or none of those clubs has an opportunity at fullback. So if that's his sole purpose on going to one of those clubs, he's not going to get a shot at fullback in any of them, I wouldn't have thought. So he's going to be a centre. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be surprised if he left Brisbane purely because the family aspect to it. He's very close to his family, as we've all seen on TV and the way he speaks about them. I'd be surprised, but then again, stranger things have happened, and these things don't come up unless there's some real fire behind it. So I feel like discussions are being had about potentially, because he wants to be paid, and Brisbane just don't have the salary cap space to be able to afford both of them.
Yeah. And I guess it's the same situation as Gutho. Like you said, he's not going to be playing fullback anywhere.
No.
So,
No.
in my opinion, you can't really command that sort of money around that $1 million mark unless you are a fullback. As a centre, like you're talking like your top centres should be on like 700,000-800,000, if that really. Most of the star playmakers, are on 700,000-800,000 at clubs, which you'd argue are influential. So, look, there's a bit of a changing of the guard there, that's for sure. Now, we're just about to dive into the review of the season. First cab off the rank is the Wooden Spoon, the 3-time in a row Wooden Spooners, the West Tigers. However, Dicko and I, we're sort of leaning towards a little bit of positivity around the Tigers camp, and we'll allude to that in a minute. But before we do, just want to shout out Grip Socks, another one of our sponsors. Use our code NOSTRA20 at checkout. That's NOSTRA20 at checkout to get a whopping discount. Let your feet do the talking. That's GRIPZSOCKS. They're fantastic, very comfortable, great elasticity around the ankles and the feet. It's exactly what you want to stop blisters and help with that mobility. Now, Dicko, Tigers, let's run through a couple of statistics here, mate. Obviously, they finished in position 17 out of 17. 6 wins, 18 losses. Point differential, -27. Now, quite an alarming statistic here. Home wins 5, away wins 1. So they won away from home once in 11 games, which is, quite extraordinary, really. And you're not going to finish very high up the ladder if that's the case. And we'll get onto the next 2 teams in a second. But in terms of their biggest win and biggest loss of the season, I'm just going to read a couple of those out because there was a couple of highlights there, but definitely some lowlights. Their biggest win of the season versus the Sharks, it was 32-6. Now, someone wrote in the comments on our socials that was their highlight of the season. Others wrote the season actually finishing, which look, there's a couple of other, snide comments in there, but nothing too full on. They did have another awesome win. It was against the Seagulls. There was a bit of controversy in that game, round 25. I think they ended up winning the game 34-26. I think there was 3 sin bins or something like that, if I recall. They were down 16-12 at halftime and came back and won that game against a team who arguably probably should have finished closer to the top 4. So there's light at the end of the tunnel for the Tigers. However, they did have some absolute Marys, and the worst of those came when it meant the most to the club, which is really disappointing to see, which is round 27, the Battle of the Spoon against the Eels. They lost 60 points to 26, and you just can't have losses like that and compete for the top 8, let alone get yourself off the wooden spoon floor. So that was really disappointing for them to end the season. But Dicko, in terms of a grade for the year, what would you give the Tigers from A to F?
So I've given the Tigers. I've chosen to find some positives with the Tigers. So I felt like there was enough positives throughout the season, and I know you talk about away from home, and that generally happens when you have a young team. They're not going to win a lot of games on the road. They're going to feel more comfortable at home, so they're probably going to, they're going to win more games at home than away.
Yeah.
So that's probably. I'm not making an excuse for them. That's probably one of their reasons for that.
Yeah.
Still a diabolical sort of statistic, mind you. But in terms of a grading, I've chosen to look at, and I've compared them to the other three teams that just finished above them. And considering their roster and recruiting and sort of where they are in the stage of their development, I've given them. I mean, they finished last, so I can't give them any higher than an E. So I've given them an E. I haven't gone full on F, whereas you're a disgrace.
No, I've actually changed. I've given him an E.
So I've gone an E purely because, as I said, I've seen enough positives from players and from the team, and they've had a couple of good wins throughout the season where they put away two top 8 teams during the season in Manly and Cronulla. I probably could have found a higher grading if they didn't just completely lose the plot in the last round of the season when they were playing for the Spoon Bowl, which I thought was a really disappointing way to end it. Because if you were going to get up for a game in any game, that would be it for them. That was their grand final.
Curiosity, mate. What would you have given them if they won that final game of the season?
I would have probably given them an F+.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I would have given them a C for sure. That's a pass mark for me for the Tigers.
Oh, you said if they won. Sorry, I thought you said if they lost.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't have given them a C. I could have given them a D+.
D+.
D+. Yeah.
Harsh critic. No, that's
they finished last. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
They're not getting a participation award. Seriously.
Yeah, there's no ribbon here in the NRL.
No, but no. I thought, enough positives for them, and I really feel like if you're a Tigers supporter out there, you should be buoyed by some recruiting they've done. I think, although I don't think they'll make the top 8 next season, I definitely think they will go a lot better and be a lot more competitive than what they have this season just gone and previous, two seasons before that.
Yeah. Now, before we jump into a few positives, we're actually going to run through each team. We're going to give our own personal assessment of who we think the MVP of the year was for the club, who we think is the most improved player at the club, and then also who do we think was the biggest disappointment or the biggest flop in each team. So we will be quite harsh. I know I will be. I don't know about you, Dicko, but I'll be ripping into a few players over the next couple of weeks. They'll be copping an ear bashing from Dizz. And we'll also actually run through the official award getters, and that is the players of the year, the players player, and the rookie of the year. So, Dicko, your MVP of the season for the Tigers, who did you give it to?
So quite simply, without him, they don't compete pretty much all season. So Api Coruscant, I've gone as the MVP, an integral part of their team, leader. As I said, without him, they probably may not win a game, to be honest.
Yeah, wow. Fair call.
Yeah. So for him, he's my MVP for them this season. Even though he's got to get better at staying on the field and not being suspended so much, I must admit.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think we alluded to it at one point. Particularly I don't know, it was weird because he got suspended for the same thing, I think, 3 times. And the spear tackle, which is quite unusual to see nowadays. Like, I reckon there was 4 suspensions for spear tackles and he got 3 of them. So, look, even though that's the case, I personally, I've given the MVP to Appy as well. Yeah, undoubtedly, like, the key leader in this side. If he can just nut out, a couple of those things out of his game, I would go as far as to say that they maybe don't finish wooden spoon, because I reckon, 30 minutes on the sideline of Appy Coruscant may have equaled a win or 2. What about most improved, mate? What's the shining light? We're not going to go into, who's going to take off in 2020 and 2025, sorry, and who's going to be, what are we looking forward to see? We're going to do that in the preview. But who is your most improved player from this season?
So just before I say that, you and I haven't actually discussed any of these together. So for the listeners, we haven't actually sat down and nutted this out. So this will be a surprise to both of us who we come up with here. So we may get some the same, we may not. But my most improved, I couldn't go past Lockie Galvin personally. I think they have to move heaven and earth to keep him. He is the future of that club. From his first game to the end of the season, the improvement in his game, I think, was exponential, and I think it's only going to get better. He will turn into one of the premier 5'8" players in the competition in the next few seasons for sure.
Yeah, look, Dicko, I couldn't agree more. He received the Rookie of the Year award. Undoubtedly, probably would have received it on Dally M night if he hadn't got suspended as well.
Mm-hmm.
For at least 2 games, which is how the rules work there. I'm just going to read out Player of the Year ended up getting awarded to Samuel Afinu, and Player's Player to Api Coruscant at the awards night at the club. I personally think the most improved player outside, Lockie Galvin, of course, but he sort of is in his first season was that man that I mentioned before who got Player of the Year, Samuel Afinu. Young players come across from Manly, didn't get much of a crack at Manly, and look, fair enough, when you've got Ola Kawadu ahead of you, you're not going to get a run unless you're an absolute superstar. He's chosen to come to the Tigers. He started off as a middle, and then they were kind of short on edge forwards there with Isaiah Papali'i, Johnny Bateman sort of leaving halfway through the year. And I think he's turned himself into sort of an out-and-out back rower. And I know Benji Marshall gives him a lot of praise behind the scenes in terms of his leadership, which is, quite surprising for a young player. And certainly setting the benchmark when it comes to, his efforts at training and therefore in the game. But he must have pulled off close to 10 tries for the year as well, in a side that, was well behind the 8 ball for most of the year. I think he was one of the shining lights. Now, biggest disappointment for the Tigers, mate. Who have you got there?
Well, apart from the fact I could name about 28 players in the squad for this one, my biggest disappointment, and I can't split 2 of them, and I've gone because they're on big money and came with big sort of pats on the back and big marquee players. I've gone Isaiah Papali'i and I've gone John Bateman. I thought,
yeah, that's good. I like it.
I thought for both players' pay packets, what they produced this season was extremely poor. Extremely poor. And if you're a fan and you know that these guys are on good money, I reckon you'd be really disappointed in what they produced.
What do you think of Dave Clemmer?
Yeah, a really interesting one. I looked at him. The thing with Dave Clemmer is I feel like the game's gone past his style of football, which is not his fault by any means. But when he's on the field, I know I'm going to get 110% out of him, and he's going to try his backside off. So I'm choosing not to be really harsh with him purely because I feel like the game's just gone past him a little bit.
It's funny you say that because I was looking at the players on big money, and I would assume that he's on sort of bigger money, given his level of experience. But it looked like the players really respected him. And I know he's done a lot of work behind the scenes. I know he had a little bit of niggle in his game, used to lose his cool there a little bit, but he was almost kind of protecting these younger players and being a sort of a dad, that fatherly figure, for
great
players. Because you got to remember, like Benji Marshall's only like 2-3 years out of the game. So yeah, look, I think you're spot on there. Funnily enough, I didn't have Isaiah Papali'i in there, but he was quite disappointing. I hope he doesn't shit the bed next year at Penrith. But Bud Sullivan for me was an absolute.
I'm glad you said that.
Flop. I agree with the John Bateman. I don't know what's going on there. Apparently, he's coming back to the Tigers now, which is just crazy. He was captain at one point as well.
Well, mate, if it was me and I was running the club, I'd just say, mate, just don't even bother packing your bags. Look, here's your release. Stay over in England. We're going to go in a different direction.
Couldn't agree more. But seriously, Bud Sullivan, talk about players who promise the world and deliver the Atlas. He was
I agree.
He had opportunity as well. It wasn't that he didn't have opportunity. In those games that he played, he just didn't perform, to where and he's on good money. I think he's on $600,000 a year.
Yeah, come over as one of their marquee guys.
Yeah, from the Dragons. I mean, the Dragons must be licking their lips going, thank God we got rid of him. And I apologize. I hope we don't get Bud Sullivan on for an interview because he probably won't want to come on after this. But
he was pipped at the post in my biggest disappointment. So I actually had him in the top 3, but he's just pipped on the line.
We've got to call it out when it's necessary.
True.
Now, you've got hope, Tigers fans, and we'll discuss
Yeah.
in our preview for next season, which is going to be
Mm.
super exciting, Dicko, because we're actually going to preview the teams next season in where we think they'll finish on the ladder from bottom to top, which is going to be very, very saucy. And I think some fans will be over the moon, and some fans will be hoping that it's opposite to what we think. Now, the South Sydney Rabbitohs. The Rabbitohs. Oh, where do we even start with these guys? Let's start off on some positives because there's not many. Player of the Year, I think, is another G up. It got given to Jack Whiten. I thought he was okay. I wouldn't say he was amazing. Dicko's probably going to turn around here and give Jack Whiten the MVP, and I'm going to look like an idiot. But he also got Players Player as well. And the Rookie of the Year went to Jai Gray, which I think is thoroughly deserves. But let's have a look at some of their stats, Dicko. Look, they obviously came second last with the Parramatta Eels winning. They actually jumped to third last at the end there. They only had one extra win than the Tigers. So let's not get too excited, Rabbitohs fans. There's nothing to cheer about here. Home record, 5 wins. Away record, 2 wins. What grade did you give the Rabbitohs, Dicko?
I gave them big red F, mate. And that was a pretty easy grading, to be honest with you. You sack your coach at the start of the season. Well, not at the start of the season, but sort of early in the season.
Yeah.
Because you're not going well, and then you fail to lift. You lift for about maybe 2 weeks, and then you fail to lift the rest of the season. So, and with the squad they had, and I know they had some injuries, and they had quite some significant injuries. You know, one of their sort of state of origin Australian rep guys, Campbell Graham, didn't play a minute this season. So, you know, there's some excuses there that they could come out with, but I really feel like as a club they don't need to bring out the excuses.
Yeah.
They just need to be better.
Just on the Jason Demetrio situation, and I'll pose this question. I'll put you on the spot again, mate. To the coaches out there, they can all coach, right? There's no doubt about it. I think I'm actually getting sick and tired of players and clubs and personalities either not performing or bringing down the culture of clubs, resulting in poor performances and therefore performance-based decisions that boards make and getting rid of coaches. I would say that 90% of the time it's the players and not the coach. And I feel really sorry for a lot of the coaches out there who have lost their job in recent times, namely Kevin Walters, Jason Demetrio, Brad Arthur. Funnily enough, we're talking about 2 of them now for the next, 5 to 10 minutes. I would argue that the Rabbitohs and the Eels themselves, the players were to blame and not the coach. Because I'll read out a couple of their wins. So they beat the Titans 46-12 in round 14. Now, the Titans weren't, that great this season and had their, star playmaker Tino out. But they also beat Manly 14-0. So if you've got results like that on the board, it tells me that there wasn't enough consistency, and they can use excuses when it comes to discipline and when it comes to injuries, and we'll highlight that in a big way. Well, I hope at least you do as well, because I know I'm going to rip shreds off a couple of players here. But they lost to the Roosters 48-6 on the other hand, and that was only in round 3. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where they're at. That they won that 14-0 game against Manly without their head coach. Jason Demetrio led them to, I believe, a prelim the year before. Is that right? So I don't know how you go from, prelim. Same with Kevin Walters going from a grand final to 12th. I'm a little bit confused. I know things can change quickly in rugby league, but I do feel sorry for Brad Arthur and Jason Demetrio, seeing as though we're, I guess, analysing this season.
But if you look at it from a business point of view and from an organisation like a football club, it's easier to get rid of a coach than 12 underperforming
Absolutely.
players.
Yeah.
So I've always said that the coach is the fall guy from poor player performance, and at the end of the day, the players have to take accountability for themselves. And unfortunately, they're in a business where, as I said, it's easier to get rid of a coach than what it is to get rid of 12 players.
And the coaching situation's been a bit of a farce. As we know, Wayne Bennett's been coaching 2 teams.
Well, yeah.
We don't need to go into any more detail there, but I did give him a big fat red F as well. However, well, no, let's just keep rolling with the punches here. I think with the Rabbitohs, who was the biggest disappointment, or was there a couple?
So my biggest disappointment was Latrell Mitchell. And now,
Yep.
I don't want to be too harsh on Latrell because I feel like he's got a lot of people coming at him.
Yep.
But Latrell, for me, is the number one player at the club, the leader, a player that the team looks up to. And I thought his performances both on and off field this season was below the standard of an NRL player. Now, I know he was injured for large chunks of the season, but even when he wasn't, I feel like he wasn't completely there and didn't give himself completely to the team.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for me, that is, for me, Latrell is the player that I would be biggest disappointment.
Yeah, and mate, you couldn't have summed it up any better. What I'll add to that is what frustrates a lot of people and what leads to this disappointment is just how good he can be.
Well, he can be the best player in the competition. That's the problem with it.
Well, let's look back to I believe it was game 2 of the Origin series. It was this year when he was undoubtedly the best player in the competition, had to be included in Madge's side. He made the side, he made the difference, and then lost his head at club football after coming off unbelievable performances of that being that round 14's game against the Titans where they won 46-12. I think he scored a double and set up 3 tries in that game. He was unbelievable. And I know this firsthand because I had him in my Supercoach team there at one point, and he was absolutely crushing it. But the off-field indiscretions and just not being able to manage his injuries and the suspensions on field, extremely disappointing. And I really hope.
Well, if we were to sum it up, I would sum it up to say that he played more bad games than good games. And for a player of his talent, and we all know his ability, as you said, you can't have that.
Yep.
You can't have the massive discrepancy between your best game and your worst game. You know what I mean?
And let's hope that, Wayne Bennett comes in and does what he's good at and cuddle some of these players and, gets the best out of Latrell and hopefully the best out of the Rabbitohs. But time will tell. I tell you what, in my preview for the season, they're not going to be very high on the ladder. I'll just throw that one out there for the viewers. MVP Dicko, who you got?
Well, I've gone with, as you said, yes, I have gone with Jack White. And he didn't have a great season in terms of like what he's done previously, but I feel like he held of what club was left, what team was left. I feel like he held them together. He played all, if not 90% of games or 95% of the games. And I really feel like if he wasn't there, they could have been complete basket case level, worse than what they were. So for that, when I was looking actually through the players and I was like, who do I actually give my MVP to? I feel like Jack White and Cameron Murray, I don't think played enough football for me to actually get the MVP. Otherwise, he potentially would have been up there.
Get 100% out of Cam Murray every game.
But I just feel like with Jack White, and he sort of held what limited sort of luck they had this year and sort of momentum. I feel like he was a part of that. So for me, he got it.
Yeah. Look, mate, I'm gonna And a couple of people have been skimming over this player, and I'm not sure why.
If you say Cody Walker, I'm going to leave this podcast immediately.
No chance in the world. He was going to be one of my biggest disappointments, actually. He wasn't far behind Latrell. So Cody, pull your finger out, mate. Keon Kolomatangi
Yeah,
was
yeah.
unbelievable. I don't know how he didn't make Origin. Statistically, even though I know they don't matter sometimes, but he ran for nearly 200 meters a game every single game. When Cam Murray was injured, he filled in at 13, and I thought he did a really good job, pretty much punching out between 65 and 80 minutes a game
Mm-hmm.
in a side that was struggling big time and getting absolutely battered pillar to post. Look, I would argue that honestly, Damien Cook was pretty good this season as well. And he's going to be sorely missed. And this is why in my preview for next season, why I've got them not very high. Because they've got Memezelis to basically come in there and that's it. I don't Sevilla Havili, I don't know who else, but we'll touch on that, in the preview. But
Oh, there has been a bit of talk that Lachlan Ilias may play 9 if he's at the club.
well, speaking of Lachlan Ilias, I've heard that he's going to go to the Newcastle Knights
Well,
with a bit of a switcheroo with Jackson Hastings. So add that one to the rumour mill. Jackson Hastings got more clubs than Tiger Woods. But yeah, Keon Kolomatangi for me, mate. I think he was unbelievable.
yep.
Um, I think he's going to get it better. He's young. He's hungry. As I said, if Wayne Bennett can get these guys, firing on all cylinders and they have minimal injuries, I think they'll see themselves skyrocket up the ladder. Who was your most improved for the year?
Yeah, so I couldn't split the most improved out of Jai Gray and Tallis Duncan. I thought
Yeah,
good,
okay.
yeah, good players, really coming into their own in grade
Yep.
at the NRL level, and I think they've got a big future for. I really feel like next season, as you say, under the tutelage of Wayne, I feel
Mm,
like they will both potentially take their games to the next level
yep.
and become really good NRL players. So for me, from where they started at the start of the season to the end, they got plenty of games under their belt now.
Yep.
I really feel like they were the most improved.
Yeah. One of the players I forgot about that they were missing for most of the year was that Junior Totola, uh,
Mm.
who's one of their big go forward middles, which they were lacking in anyway. Hence why I've actually given my most improved to David Mawali.
Oh yeah,
I think the back half of the season after Totola got injured, I really think that he was one of the unsung. I'm not going to call him an unsung hero because that's a little bit over the top, but he was definitely one of those players that stepped up and improved his game out of sight too. More than likely, probably featuring in the starting 17, if not that starting front rower spot for next season. So yeah,
yep.
we'll see how they line up for next year, but that's the Rabbitohs for 2024. Big fat F.
A season, a season they would prefer to forget, I reckon.
Absolutely. Now, Parramatta Eels. Before we go into the Parramatta Eels, I just want to remind everyone that we have the Pacific tests coming up this weekend. So we have Australia versus Tonga on Friday night and Fiji versus PNG on the Saturday. Dicko, what do you think about the Fiji PNG game?
I think this will be a cracker. Um, I think the Fijians will just pip them, but I think it'll
Yep.
be close and brutal. It'll
Yeah,
absolutely
certainly.
be brutal.
Certainly a few NRL players lining up. I'm still trying to work out how Jack DeBellins from Papua New Guinea. I'd love someone to fill me in on that one. But there's a star-studded lineup. A couple of players from the Super League. The Kumuls look very, very strong. The Fijians have named 7 NRL players, and they look really, really strong. Viliami Kikau, Suni Taruva. You've got Tui Kemikamika in the front row. Michael Jennings, I think, is playing. Shout out to Jared Hayne. He's back on the coaching staff. He's back in rugby league. So good on the Hayne plane. Um, yeah, but I think you're right, mate. I think Fiji get the
Too
job
strong.
done. What about the Australian Tonga game? I mean, far out. It on paper, it looks closer than you think. I think this one might be. are close.
Well, it's hard to preview internationals without form, isn't it? So form line. So some of the Aussies are going to, or some of their players that they play, like Mitch Moses, would I assume get the 7.
Who hasn't
So
played
he hasn't played for months. You know,
Yeah.
a guy like Paddy Carrigan hasn't played in what, probably 6 weeks. And so if you haven't played finals, you haven't played in a while. So yeah, really hard to gauge your form line. Be interesting to see how Australia gel. They've gone for a sort of a revamped squad, I would say. I think it'll be tough and close, but I think Australia just too much class.
Yes.
In the key positions. I think they will. I think always what lets Tonga down is their key position players. They're sort of makeshift halves rather than actual genuine half or 5/8.
Because I think they got Isaiah Katoa in the half, and then they got Lola Haya playing at 6. I think.
Yeah, exactly. So you know what I mean. They're not. Isaiah Katoa is a good player, but they're not world beaters just yet, right? So you know, and you're coming up against Tommy Dearden, and you know, one of the top 5 players in the competition last season, probably.
Yeah.
And Mitch Moses, who was, you know, probably second to Angus Crichton in the Player of the Series for State of Origin. So, yeah, so I think Australia just in the big moments will get it done, but I think it'll be close. I think it'll go down to the wire. Actually, I think Tonga will give them a red hot go.
Yeah. Yep. No, looking forward to it. I'm gonna say Australia by close first half, but then by 22. That's the prediction straight out of Nostradamus HQ. Now, Parramatta Eels to finish off, Dicko. Parramatta Eels, they finished 15th. They had 5 wins at home, 2 wins away. Their biggest win of the season came the last game of the year when it mattered most. So kudos to them, because I tell you what, if they lost that last game of the season, they would have got the biggest F in history if they finished wooden spoon. They haven't on my books anyway been given too much higher than an F. They were, look, I just want to highlight a couple of I guess highlights outside their biggest win for the Tigers. So it was actually the game against the Sea Eagles. I don't know if you recall that game, Dicko, in round 3. They were down 12-0 early, like real early, like 7 minutes in. Sea Eagles went bang, bang, and you thought, oh, geez, this could be a cricket score. They actually came back and won this game. And that was probably, I think it was 28-24. The game.
It was at a Sunday Arvo game, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it sort of ebbed and flowed a little bit. And it was good to see them get the win. But in terms of highlights, look, there wasn't many. And the worst of those coming, arguably, the two significant ones that are on paper anyway, and they sort of stand out to me. Against the Raiders, I mean, I think you switched the game off at halftime. I remember you messaging me going, what is going on here? They lost 41-8. And it was just disgraceful. That was round 5. 2 weeks after they've, put in a great performance against Manly, they get belted 41-8. And I think that's when the wheels came off and fingers started getting pointed, because then again in round 7, and I know you remember this game, it was versus the Dolphins, and it was in Darwin, and it was 8-0 up to the Parramatta Eels. And then I don't know what happened, but they got absolutely smashed after that and lost 44-16. And Jack Bostock looked like the best winger in Australia.
Yeah, yes.
So what grade would you give him, Dicko? What grade?
Firstly, what I'll say is I'm glad I'm not a Parramatta Eels supporter, because from top to bottom, they are an absolute rabble. And I hope they get better, because I don't think a competition, same with the Rabbitohs. The NRL's better when the Rabbitohs, the Eels, teams like the Broncos are going better than what they went this season, right? Yep. So my grade for them is an F. For the squad, again, I know injuries play a part, but the squad they have, and I know they lost their halfback for half a season, but even before that, they weren't convincing me with any sort of with any part of their football.
Yeah.
So yeah. I had no hesitation in giving them an F.
An F. Wow. Wow. Harsh critic. Look, no, not too harsh. If they didn't win the last game of the season, I would give them an F. I haven't gone too much higher. I've given them an E-. I've been a little bit generous there. B minus for the Parramatta Eels. My goodness gracious me. Look, let's read out some of the award winners. It's quite funny, actually. When we go back through some of these award winners, it's going to be a good laugh for a lot of these because it feels like all these award winners are going to other clubs. So I don't know whether these clubs have made the right decision or, they've made a decision halfway through the year and these players have gone, oh, you know what, I might start trying now because I'm off contract and I'm on the outer. But the player of the year went to Regan Campbell-Gillard. Now, we highlighted him.
You're fucking kidding me.
No, I'm not joking at all.
Oh, my God.
He got given player of the year for Parramatta, which is mind-boggling. Player's player went to Gutho. And rookie of the year, Blaze Talangi. And all three players are probably not going to be at Parramatta for next season. So, oh, dear. Now, mate, what I really struggled with here was finding a most improved player. But before we go down the most improved player path, who was your MVP for the Parramatta Eels?
Sorry, I'm just getting over the fact that Regan Campbell-Gillard was given the player of the year.
He was given the...
seriously.
Yeah.
Clint Gutherson is my MVP because I don't think that club ticks without him. And I must admit, I'm a bit bewildered in the direction that they're going, considering they've given him permission to leave. Although I don't know whether he is a fullback anymore in the current game, I feel like he still has plenty to offer as maybe a centre. But yeah, I really feel like this season, if he doesn't play, I don't know whether they. It's a bit like the Appy Coruscant. I don't know whether they win any games, to be honest with you. I reckon the last 4 to 6 weeks he played busted, like severely busted.
He played with a torn quad or something.
Yeah, I don't understand how they can come up with a player of the year, Regan Campbell-Gillard, who they've been trying to get rid of pretty much all season. And Clint Gutherson gets the player's player. So, I mean, for me, he's my MVP by the length of the straight. There's not much more I can say about him, really. I mean, I feel like he gives 100%. I don't actually think, I think his fullback days are done, personally. I think he needs to move into another position.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still think he's got a lot to give for sure.
Shall we go into the biggest disappointment? Is there too many on this sheet? I ran out of ink when I was writing this down.
Well, I've narrowed it down to one. Biggest disappointment. Yeah, to one. And it was Junior Paulo. Because I don't reckon there was one game this season that I watched at Parramatta. Now, I watched a lot of footy. I don't reckon there was one game where I actually thought, geez, Junior Paulo's going really well this game.
He's on 900 to 900.
And he's on 900,000 a year. So,
and they've decided to keep him.
Can we get a refund? Is there a chance for a refund?
Is there a compensation package here?
Because he turned up, but he didn't put in.
Dear, oh dear.
So he's an Origin player, and he's a Test player.
He was not good. He wasn't. He was injured for a little bit, but that's no excuse. Like, he just wasn't.
But even when he wasn't injured, again, I sat there and I didn't go, geez, Junior Paulo's going well. And he's on the. Let's just put this into perspective. He is on the same money. Well, some of these guys' contracts have been upgraded this year, but right. He's on the same money. He's on more money than Isaiah Yeo. He's on more money than Pat Carrigan. Yep. He's on the same, probably not now, but was probably on the same coin as Fisher Harris.
He's on more than Ruben Cotter.
He's on more than Ruben Cotter.
More than Cam Murray.
Like, what oh my God.
Yeah.
And they're asking, and they're keeping him, and they're getting rid of the player of the year.
Well, you know what? Before I actually chose the biggest disappointment, I actually had Regan Campbell-Gillard written down, and then I saw he got given Player of the Year, and I thought, how am I gonna turn this into a proper segment when I'm giving the biggest disappointment to whoever got the Player of the Year?
Yeah.
I think that was more the thanks very much for your service at this club.
Who have you gone?
Well, I actually had Junior Paulo as well.
Yeah.
Seriously, he was You know what? He's dead set, signed a contract there at the peak of his powers and gone, thanks very much for coming. I'm just going to put my feet up.
Yeah.
Because 2 years ago, mate, I was at Darling Harbour, Circular Quay, getting photos taken with Nathan Cleary and Junior Paulo to preview a grand final.
Mm.
And now look where Parramatta are. Like, it's
Yeah.
just,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
not good. It is
Yep.
really not good. But let's get on to some positive chat
I do
about.
have a most improved too.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
come up with the
Who,
most
who is
improved.
it? Who's your most improved, Dicko?
I've gone with Blaze Talangi.
Yep.
I feel like, I mean, and what swayed me with him is Penrith don't come calling unless they really feel like a player's got a big future.
Mm.
And I feel like he, from the first game, he showed glimpses that he could be a star of the competition. I thought he was patchy towards the end of the season, but again, when you first come into grade, you're going to have ups and downs.
Yeah. Defensively, mate.
Defensively, maybe, yeah, and I think he's got a lot to learn in the centre position.
Mm.
I'm not sure where he's going to play for Penrith. I feel like his future's at fullback. I really do. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see his journey. Like, I feel like Penrith will turn him into a really good footballer. And I don't see why he can't be one of the premier players in the competition. But yeah, for me this year, I thought an honourable mention, or what I will say, is Will Penasini. I thought he had a red hot dip every time he went out on the field. But yeah, I thought if you look at improvement over a season, I thought Blaze Talangi.
Yeah, no, awesome shout out there. And yeah, look, yeah, yeah, now that you've said it, yeah, he probably was, one of those shining lights along with a couple of other players that we'll preview for round 20, for 2025 next season. But I wrote down Brendan Hands. I
Okay.
thought that Joey Lussick was a massive flop. I should have put him as the biggest disappointment because he was 80 minutes at the start of the season. Actually was okay for the first couple of rounds. I think he even scooted in for a few tries there at one point, but they had to basically make a call of, do we play Hands and Lussick, or, who comes off the bench, who doesn't? And then pretty much Brendan Hands was playing that well that he ended up playing 80 minutes, I think, for the last sort of 10 rounds of the season. And Joey Lussick came in as just like a makeshift 5-10 minute cameo there, and Brendan Hands stayed on the field. Brendan Hands is a Penrith junior. He's gone across to the dark side, and look, I don't know. Eels seem like they're in the market for Jaden Brayley. That's all the talk at the moment. But I don't know. There's been
I think they need a
no
9. They do
offer.
need a 9.
But yeah, look, I don't think they're gonna. I think he was really good. I think he was, from where he was at the start of the year, playing sort
Mm-hmm.
of 15, 20 minutes off the bench and not knowing where his future is in the NRL. I think he'll be, in the NRL for a while. And I think he's really cemented himself as an NRL player.
Yep.
There you go, Dicko. There's the first three teams, mate, done and dusted. And next week, we will be doing let me check the ladder because I can't even remember.
Titans, it's Titans, Warriors, Broncos.
That's it. Yep. Titans, Warriors, Broncos. Now that's going to be a very interesting one, mate, given you're a Broncos fan.
Cannot wait.
Buckle in. Now just a bit of a shout out to the fans as well. We're going to be coming up with some Movember ideas surrounding our merch. So we're going to put a poll up after this. Anyone's got any suggestions or ideas? We're open ears here at Nostradamus, and more than happy to hear your thoughts. But stay tuned for next week. Titans, Warriors, Broncos. Here we come.
Can't wait. How good.
Disclaimer. Any views or opinions represented in this podcast and or Facebook and social media pages are personal and belong solely to the podcast owners and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owners may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. Unless explicitly stated, any views or opinions are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, organization, club, company, or individual. All content provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only. The owners of this podcast make no representation as to the accuracy or completeness of any information on this site or found by following any link on this website. Owners will not be liable for any errors or omissions in this information, nor for the availability of this information. The owners will not be liable for any losses, injuries, or damages from the display or use of this information.